General Alara Thorne stepped into the dimly lit conference room, her footsteps echoing against the cold metal floor. The room was buzzing with a palpable tension, as the top military minds and leaders of humanity gathered to address the unthinkable and alien attack on the Fritz 11 colony. Alara took her seat at the circular table, exchanging grim nods with her colleagues. The faces around her were etched with a mixture of shock, anger, and fear. Just days ago, the idea of extraterrestrial life was nothing more than a topic of speculation and conspiracy theories. Now it was a harsh reality that had left countless colonists dead and humanity reeling. As the room settled, Admiral Ezra Vance, a tall, broad-shouldered man with piercing gray eyes, stood up to address the gathering. "We all know why we're here," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "The Fritz 11 colony has been decimated by an unknown alien force. We have no prior knowledge of these beings, their capabilities, or their intentions." The room remained silent, the gravity of the words sinking in. Alara glanced around, studying the reactions of her fellow leaders. Some looked determined, others frightened, but all shared a common resolve: they would not let this attack go unanswered. Admiral Vance continued, "Our first priority is to ensure the safety of our remaining colonies and Earth itself. We have already heightened security measures and mobilized troops to key locations. However, we must also begin to plan our response to this unprovoked act of aggression." Murmurs of agreement filled the room, as the leaders began to discuss the limited information they had on the alien attackers. Alara listened intently, her mind racing with questions and possibilities. Who were these aliens? Why had they attacked without warning or provocation? And most importantly, how could humanity hope to defend against a threat they knew nothing about? As the discussions continued, a young lieutenant entered the room, clutching a stack of papers. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to the newcomer. "Sir," the lieutenant addressed Admiral Vance, "we have the first reports from the survivors of the Fritz 11 attack." Admiral Vance took the papers, his expression grim. "Thank you, Lieutenant. We will review these reports immediately. They may hold the key to understanding our enemy and formulating our response." With that, the lieutenant exited the room, leaving the leaders to pore over the harrowing accounts of the few who had lived through the alien onslaught. Alara steeled herself, knowing that the contents of those reports would shape the course of humanity's future, and that the decisions made in this room would echo through the ages. As the leaders began to review the survivor reports, a heavy silence descended upon the room. Alara watched as her colleagues' faces paled, their expressions shifting from grim determination to pure horror as they read through the harrowing accounts. One by one, the leaders shared the details of the reports, painting a picture of unimaginable brutality and cruelty. The aliens had attacked without mercy, slaughtering colonists indiscriminately. Men, women, and children alike fell victim to their relentless onslaught, their bodies left broken and mutilated in the streets. "They showed no regard for human life," Admiral Vance said, his voice trembling slightly as he read from a report. "Eyewitnesses described the aliens as monstrous beings with razor-sharp claws and teeth, and an insatiable thirst for blood." Alara felt a chill run down her spine as she listened to the descriptions of the aliens. It was hard to imagine beings so utterly devoid of compassion or empathy. The reports spoke of colonists being torn apart, their screams echoing through the streets as the aliens reveled in the carnage. As the leaders continued to share the grim details, a palpable anger began to build in the room. The aliens were no longer just a faceless enemy, they were monsters, creatures that needed to be stopped at any cost. "These things are not just a threat to our colony's General Thorne Varga," a grizzled veteran with a scar running down his left cheek, growled. "They're a threat to our very existence. We cannot allow them to continue unchecked." Murmurs of agreement filled the room as the leaders grappled with the enormity of the task before them. They knew that they were facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered before, an enemy that had no qualms about slaughtering innocent civilians. Alara listened as the discussions turned to the need for retribution, for a response that would make it clear to the aliens and any other potential aggressors that humanity would not tolerate such atrocities. The anger in the room was palpable, fueled by the graphic descriptions of the aliens' brutality. As the meeting wore on, Alara found herself grappling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, she understood the desire for vengeance, the need to make the aliens pay for the lives they had taken. On the other hand, she couldn't help but wonder if meeting violence with more violence was truly the answer. But as the reports continued to pour in, each one more horrific than the last, Alara felt her resolve hardening. The aliens had shown no mercy, no regard for human life. If humanity was to survive, they would need to respond with equal measure. The path ahead would be fraught with difficult decisions and moral dilemmas, but one thing was clear: the monsters responsible for the Fritz 11 massacre could not be allowed to go unpunished. Humanity would fight back, and they would not rest until the alien threat was eliminated once and for all. As the shock and horror of the reports began to settle, the leaders turned their attention to the daunting task of formulating a plan to counter the alien threat. Ideas began to fly around the room, each one more ambitious and aggressive than the last. Admiral Vance was the first to propose a concrete solution. "We need to build up our naval forces," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We have to take the fight to the aliens, to show them that we will not be cowed by their brutality." Alara leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "But we know so little about their capabilities," she argued. "How can we be sure that our ships will be a match for their technology?" "We don't have a choice," General Varga countered. "We cannot sit back and wait for them to strike again. We must act, and we must act now." As the discussions continued, a consensus began to emerge. Humanity would pour all of its resources into building a fleet of warships, each one equipped with the most advanced weapons and defenses that their technology could muster. But even as the plan took shape, Alara couldn't shake the nagging doubt that tugged at the back of her mind. Was this really the right course of action? Was meeting violence with more violence truly the answer? Her doubts were quickly overshadowed, however, as more reports began to filter in from the Fritz 11 colony. Each one was more horrific than the last, detailing the sadistic cruelty of the alien attackers. Stories of families torn apart, of children slaughtered in front of their parents, of entire city blocks reduced to rubble and ash. As the reports continued to pour in, the tone of the meeting began to shift. No longer were the leaders discussing a measured response or a show of force. Now, there was talk of annihilation, of wiping the alien menace from the face of the universe. "We cannot allow a single one of these monsters to survive," General Varga declared, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. "They have shown us no mercy, and we shall show them none in return." Around the room, heads nodded in grim agreement. The aliens had crossed a line, and there could be no going back. Humanity would not rest until every last one of the invaders had been hunted down and destroyed. Alara sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She knew that what they were proposing was nothing short of genocide, the complete eradication of an entire species. It was a thought that made her stomach churn, but as she looked around the room at the faces of her colleagues, she knew that there was no turning back. The plan was set in motion, and the wheels of war began to turn. Humanity would build its fleet, and they would hunt the aliens to the ends of the universe if necessary. There could be no peace, no coexistence with creatures capable of such unspeakable acts. As the meeting adjourned, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something much larger than themselves. The decisions made in this room would shape the course of human history, for better or for worse. But one thing was certain: the aliens had awoken a sleeping giant, and humanity would not rest until the monsters responsible for the Fritz 11 massacre had been brought to justice. The price of peace would be high, but it was a price they were willing to pay. General Alara Thorne stood on the observation deck of the USS Redemption, the flagship of humanity's newly built war fleet. As she gazed out at the sea of stars before her, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. It had been months since the fateful meeting where the decision had been made to eradicate the alien threat. In that time, humanity had poured all of its resources into building the most formidable fleet the universe had ever seen. But even as the ships took shape and the weapons were tested, Alara found herself grappling with the moral implications of what they were about to do. The aliens had committed unspeakable atrocities, but did that justify the complete annihilation of their species? She thought back to the reports from the Fritz 11 massacre, the images of broken bodies and shattered lives forever seared into her memory. The aliens had shown no mercy, no regard for innocent life. They had to be stopped, at any cost. And yet, as she stood on the precipice of war, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to cross a line from which there was no return. To commit genocide, to wipe an entire species from existence, was that not the very thing they were fighting against? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Admiral Vance approaching, his face set in a grim expression. "General Thorne," he said, nodding in greeting. "The fleet is ready. We await your orders." Alara took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. "Give the order, Admiral," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Let's end this, once and for all." As the Admiral relayed the orders, Alara watched as the fleet sprang into action. Ships hummed to life, weapons systems engaged, and soldiers prepared for the battle ahead. She knew that the price of peace would be high. Lives would be lost, both human and alien. But she also knew that if they didn't act now, the cost would be even greater. The aliens had to be stopped, or else humanity itself faced extinction. And so, as the USS Redemption led the charge into the unknown, Alara made a silent vow. She would see this through to the end, no matter the cost. She would ensure that no other species would ever dare to attack humanity again. Peace would come, but it would be a peace bought with blood and maintained through fear. It was a heavy burden to bear, but one that Alara knew she must shoulder for the sake of her people. As the stars streaked past the observation deck windows, Alara closed her eyes, sending a silent prayer to whatever gods might be listening. She prayed for strength, for courage, and for the wisdom to make the right choices in the battles ahead. For in the end, the price of peace was a price that only the strong could pay, and Alara was determined to be strong, for the sake of all those who had been lost, and for all those who would come after. The war had begun, and the fate of the universe hung in the balance. Only time would tell if the price of peace was one that humanity was truly willing to pay. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to subscribe and leave a like. I'll see you in our next video.